The bucket scraped against the smooth tiles, its hollow echo filling the vast emptiness of the school hallway. The sky outside remained a deep shade of blue, only beginning to lighten as the first hints of dawn stretched across the horizon. In just a short while, the halls would come alive with hurried footsteps, chatter, and the rustling of books being shuffled into lockers. But for now, this quiet world belonged to one man alone. Ronald Lewis, the janitor of Oxbridge Academy, had long since grown accustomed to the stillness of the early morning. It was in these solitary hours that he found a certain peace, a rhythm in the repetition of his work. With steady, practiced motions, he pushed the mop back and forth across the polished floors, ensuring that by the time the students arrived, everything would be spotless, as if no one had ever walked these halls before. He had been here for over 2 decades, since the days when his hair was still thick and dark, and his back didn't ache after long hours of work. He had seen students come and go, watched them grow from nervous freshmen into confident young adults. Some he remembered vividly, kids who had stopped to chat with him, who had asked about his day, who had taken a moment to acknowledge his presence, but most simply passed him by, too absorbed in their own world to notice the man who made sure their environment was clean, safe, and welcoming. Ronald never minded. He wasn't here for recognition or gratitude. He did his job because he believed in it. His father had always told him that honest work was the backbone of any community, and he had taken that lesson to heart. There was pride in knowing that his efforts contributed, even in a small way, to the lives of these students. As he wiped down one of the tall windows in the main hallway, he heard the faint scuff of shoes behind him. He turned and saw a familiar figure approaching. Hands tucked into his jacket pockets, the boy moved with a quiet confidence, his tall frame distinct even in the dim morning light. "Good morning, Mr. Lewis," came the calm, even voice of Barron Trump. Ronald offered a small, knowing smile. "Morning, Barron. You're here early again." Barron shrugged. "I like the quiet." The janitor nodded in understanding. "Yeah, there's something about it, isn't there? The school feels different before everyone else gets here." Barron didn't respond right away. Instead, he watched as Ronald wrung out the mop, his hands worn and calloused from years of labor. His uniform was clean but faded, and his shoes, sturdy and practical, showed signs of heavy use. The boy's gaze flicked downward for a brief moment before he leaned casually against the wall. "Don't you ever get tired?" Barron asked, his tone thoughtful rather than critical. Ronald let out a short chuckle, the kind that carried the weight of experience. "Sometimes," he admitted, setting the mop aside. "But you know, when you do something for others, the tiredness doesn't seem so bad." Barron studied him carefully. He had always been more of an observer than a talker, and Ronald was someone he had observed for a long time. The janitor never sought attention, never complained. He moved through the school with quiet purpose, unnoticed by most, yet deeply integral to the daily life of the academy. And yet there was something about him today, something that Barron hadn't quite noticed before. The slight hunch in his shoulders, the deep circles under his eyes, the weary way he carried himself. It wasn't just the years weighing on him, it was something else. Barron shifted his focus to the man's shoes, then to his hands. Rough, cracked from exposure to cleaning chemicals. He thought of the old car he had seen Ronald drive every day, the way it sputtered and groaned when the janitor tried to start it in the parking lot. He had heard the engine struggle more than once, watched Ronald stand outside in the cold, coaxing it to life with quiet patience. "How old is your car?" Barron asked, feigning casual interest. Ronald chuckled again, shaking his head. "Older than I'd like to admit, but it gets me where I need to go, and that's what matters." The words were said with conviction, but Barron couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't entirely true. A man like Ronald, who gave so much, who asked for nothing, deserved better. Barron had never been the kind of person to act impulsively, but something about this moment stirred him. He had seen enough. He had noticed enough. and now he had to do something about it. As Ronald picked up his mop and continued his work, Barron stood there for a moment longer, deep in thought. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, already forming a plan in his mind. What would you have done in Barron's place? Let us know in the comments. Barron Trump had always been a keen observer. Unlike many of his peers, he didn't crave the spotlight or the constant chatter of teenage life. Instead, he preferred to watch, to listen, and to understand. And over the past few months, he had been watching Ronald Lewis. At first, it had been nothing more than a passing curiosity, the kind of idle noticing one does when encountering the same person day after day. But gradually, Barron had started paying closer attention. He saw the way Mr. Lewis moved through the school, his presence unassuming yet constant. He saw the way he greeted every student, no matter how rushed or indifferent they were. He noticed the small things, the way the janitor fixed a broken locker without being asked, the way he picked up stray pieces of paper left behind after lunch, the way he always seemed to be the last to leave and the first to arrive. Barron was used to people looking past him, to making assumptions based on his last name or the world he came from. But Mr. Lewis, he never treated him differently. To Ronald, Barron was just another student, one of many that passed through the halls of Oxbridge Academy. And there was something refreshing about that. Now, standing in the nearly empty hallway, Barron mulled over their brief conversation that morning. The quiet resignation in Mr. Lewis's voice when he spoke about his car, the tired way he carried himself, it had stuck with him. Most people went about their day without thinking twice about the custodians, the cafeteria workers, or the security guards who kept their world running smoothly. But Barron had been raised with a different understanding. His father had always told him that a person's true character was revealed in how they treated those who couldn't offer them anything in return. And from what Barron had seen, Mr. Lewis was one of the finest men in this school. Barron made his way outside, stepping into the crisp morning air. He spotted Mr. Lewis's car in the parking lot, an old sedan that had seen better days. The paint was dull, the tires were thinning, and the hood bore a dent that looked like it had been there for years. Every morning, he watched as Mr. Lewis coaxed the reluctant engine to life, as if bargaining with it for just one more day. The thought gnawed at him. Someone who had given so much, who had worked tirelessly without complaint, deserved better. But how could he help without making it seem like charity? He sat down on one of the courtyard benches, tapping his fingers against the wooden surface. If there was one thing he knew, it was that people responded to a cause when they felt personally connected to it. If he could find a way to get the students involved, to make them realize just how much Mr. Lewis did for them, then maybe, just maybe, they could do something meaningful in return. A fundraiser, that was the answer. But not just any fundraiser, one that would ensure everyone had a stake in it, that every donation would be a symbol of gratitude, not just another check written by someone with money to spare. Barron stood up, his mind racing. He needed to gather a few trusted people, the ones who could help him make this happen. He wasn't the type to take center stage. But for this, he would step out of his comfort zone. As he walked back inside, determination settled in his chest. He had a plan. Now, he just needed to put it into motion. How would you spread the word about this cause? Let us know in the comments. Barron Trump sat in the quiet corner of the school library, his notebook open in front of him. The pages were blank, but his mind was filled with possibilities. The idea had taken root, and now it was time to turn it into something real. Mr. Lewis deserved more than silent gratitude. He deserved something tangible, something that showed how much he meant to the students and faculty of Oxbridge Academy. The image of the janitor's battered old sedan stuck in Barron's mind. The rusting edges, the dented hood, the way it coughed to life every morning like an old man struggling out of bed. That car had done its job for years, just like Mr. Lewis had, but it was time for something better. A fundraiser, that was the only way. But it couldn't just be a standard collection of donations. It had to be something the entire school could rally behind. Something that made people stop and recognize Mr. Lewis for the quiet, unwavering presence he had always been. Barron tapped his pen against the desk and leaned back in his chair. He needed to spread the word in a way that felt personal, that connected with people on a deeper level. His phone buzzed. A message from Jason, one of his closest friends. "Dude, why were you staring at Mr. Lewis's car this morning? Planning to buy it?" Barron smirked and shook his head before typing a quick reply. "Not exactly. Meet me outside after lunch. I've got something to talk about." The cafeteria was alive with noise. Students laughing, chairs scraping against the floor, the rhythmic clatter of trays being stacked. Barron navigated through the crowd, spotting Jason and a few of their mutual friends at their usual table near the back. He sat down, setting his notebook on the table. "All right, listen up." Jason raised an eyebrow. "This sounds serious." "It is." Barron exhaled, then leaned forward. "You guys know Mr. Lewis, right? The janitor." "Of course," Emily said, tilting her head. "He's the nicest guy ever. Why?" Barron glanced around, ensuring no one else was listening. "His car is falling apart. I mean, literally. It's a miracle it still runs." Jason nodded. "Yeah, I've seen him struggle with it in the parking lot." "So here's what I'm thinking," Barron continued. "We start a fundraiser, not just asking for money. We make it an event, something everyone in the school can be part of. Something that'll show him how much we appreciate him." There was a beat of silence. Then, Emily grinned. "I love it. But how do we do it? We can't just go around with a donation box." "No," Barron agreed. "We need a strategy." The group spent the next 20 minutes brainstorming. Ideas flowed freely, everything from a charity basketball game to an auction of student-made art. Finally, they landed on something that felt right. A school-wide fundraiser event where students and teachers could donate by participating in fun challenges and activities. It would be promoted on social media, through posters, and even by word of mouth. More than just raising money, it would raise awareness. It would remind people that Mr. Lewis was more than just the janitor. He was a part of their daily lives, someone who had quietly made their school experience better every single day. Barron scribbled down the final details. "We need to talk to the principal. If she's on board, this thing could actually work." Jason smirked. "And you're going to be the one to convince her." Barron smiled. "Guess so." As he closed his notebook, a new sense of determination settled over him. This wasn't just a plan anymore. It was a mission. If you were in Barron's place, how would you organize the fundraiser? Let us know in the comments. The principal's office had an air of authority, the kind that made most students hesitate before knocking on the heavy wooden door. But Barron Trunk didn't hesitate. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and knocked twice. "Come in," Principal Williams called from inside. Barron stepped in, his notebook clutched in his hands. Principal Williams, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s, adjusted her glasses as she looked up from her desk. "Mr. Trump, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I have an idea," Barron said, closing the door behind him. "And I think it's something the entire school can get behind." She gestured to the chair in front of her desk. "I'm listening." Barron laid out his plan, every detail, every reason why this fundraiser mattered. He spoke about Mr. Lewis's dedication, his unwavering kindness, and the way he made every student's life just a little bit easier without expecting anything in return. He explained the event concept, how it would not only raise money, but also foster a deeper sense of community. When he finished, Principal Williams was silent for a moment. Then she smiled. "This is one of the most thoughtful initiatives I've ever heard from a student," she said. You have my full support." Barron let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Thank you, Principal Williams." "I'll talk to the faculty," she said. "We'll set up a meeting to finalize the logistics, but you'll need student support to pull this off." "That won't be a problem," Barron said, already thinking ahead. By the next morning, the entire school was buzzing with talk of the fundraiser. Barron and his friends had wasted no time. They put up posters, spread the word on social media, and personally spoke to students between classes. Emily had designed a sleek digital flyer, while Jason worked on a short promotional video featuring clips of Mr. Lewis in action, cleaning the halls, fixing a locker, greeting students with his signature warm smile. It didn't take long for the stories to start pouring in. "I remember when I lost my phone," one student commented on the fundraiser's Instagram post. "Mr. Lewis spent his entire lunch break helping me find it. He once stayed after school to help me carry my art project to my mom's car." Another wrote, "I didn't even ask. He just saw me struggling and offered." Soon, the school was united in purpose. The teachers got involved too, offering extra credit for students who participated in the fundraiser activities. Even the cafeteria staff pitched in, agreeing to donate a portion of snack sales for the week. The momentum was undeniable. What had started as a simple idea was now a full-fledged movement. On the day of the fundraiser, the school was transformed. The gymnasium had been converted into an event space filled with activity booths, games, and donation stations. There was a basketball free throw challenge, a bake sale, even a dump tank where students could pay to dump their favorite teachers. Barron stood near the entrance, watching as students poured in, laughter and excitement filling the air. Jason clapped him on the back. "This is actually happening." Barron smiled, nodding. "Yeah, and it's only the beginning." If you were organizing this event, what activity would you add? Let us know in the comments. As the fundraiser gained momentum, the donations started pouring in faster than Barron had anticipated. Students, teachers, and even parents were chipping in, each contribution a testament to how much Mr. Lewis meant to the school. Yet, despite the overwhelming support, Barron knew they still had a long way to go. A new car wasn't cheap, and even with the generosity of the school community, they weren't quite there yet. One evening, as Barron sat at his desk tallying the numbers, he heard a soft knock on his bedroom door. His father, Donald Trump, stepped inside, a curious look in his eyes. "I heard you've been busy with something at school," his father said, folding his arms. "Want to tell me about it?" Barron hesitated for a moment before deciding to go all in. He explained everything. Mr. Lewis' dedication, the struggles with his car, the way the students had come together to show their gratitude. He spoke with passion, his words carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed firsthand how much kindness could go unnoticed. When he finished, his father was silent for a moment, then nodded. "That's impressive," he finally said. "You saw a problem and took action. That's leadership." Barron looked down at the donation list. "We're still short, though." Donald smirked. "Let me make a few calls." The next day, Barron received a text from his father. "Check your fundraiser account." His eyes widened as he saw the latest donation, an anonymous contribution that nearly doubled their total. Stunned, he sat back in his chair, letting the reality sink in. His father had done more than just make calls. He had ensured that the fundraiser reached its goal. Word spread fast. The students and faculty were ecstatic, and suddenly, what once seemed like an impossible dream was now within reach. The final hurdle had been cleared. Now, all that was left was the biggest moment of all, the reveal. Have you ever witnessed an act of generosity that changed someone's life? Share your story in the comments. The morning of the big reveal, Oxbridge Academy buzzed with excitement. Whispers filled the hallways, and students exchanged knowing glances, barely able to contain their anticipation. Mr. Lewis, oblivious to what was happening, went about his morning routine as usual, greeting students and ensuring the school was in pristine condition. Barron stood near the gymnasium entrance, heart pounding in his chest. Everything was set. The entire school had gathered inside, teachers and students alike, all waiting for the moment they had worked so hard for. The shiny new car sat outside, hidden under a large sheet, waiting to make its debut. Principal Williams took the stage, microphone in hand, and cleared her throat. Good morning, everyone. Today, we gather here not for a school event, not for a competition, but for something far more important: gratitude. The crowd fell silent as she continued. There are people in this school who work tirelessly behind the scenes, who never seek recognition but make our days better, easier, and brighter. One of those people is standing among us right now, Mr. Ronald Lewis. The gym erupted into cheers as Mr. Lewis looked around confused. He chuckled nervously, shaking his head as students clapped and whistled. "What's all this about?" he asked, looking at Barron, who stepped forward with a microphone. "Mr. Lewis," Barron began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You've spent years making this school a better place, not because you had to, but because you cared. We've all seen it. The little things, the unnoticed acts of kindness, the times you went out of your way for us without expecting anything in return." Tears welled in Mr. Lewis's eyes as Barron gestured toward the massive screen behind them. The lights dimmed, and a video montage began to play. Clips of Mr. Lewis helping students, fixing lockers, and greeting staff were interwoven with testimonials from students and teachers. "He helped me when I lost my project the day before my final presentation. He made sure the halls were always spotless, even when we didn't respect them. He's more than a janitor. He's a part of this school's heart." As the video ended, the students stood in a wave of applause. Mr. Lewis wiped his face, overwhelmed. Principal Williams smiled and turned to him. "Mr. Lewis, we wanted to give back. And thanks to the generosity of the students, faculty, and community, we're proud to present you with a token of our appreciation." The gym doors swung open and the crowd moved outside. A single spotlight illuminated the covered car. Barron stepped forward and gripped the edge of the sheet. "Mr. Lewis, this is for you." With one swift motion, he pulled the sheet away, revealing a brand new SUV, gleaming in the morning sunlight. The crowd erupted into cheers as Mr. Lewis stood frozen, hands over his mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. "No, this can't be for me," he stammered. Barron handed him the keys. "It is, and it's from all of us." Tears spilled down Mr. Lewis's face as he ran a trembling hand over the hood of the car. The students chanted his name, clapping and cheering as he turned to face them. I don't know what to say." "Just say you'll keep being you," Barron said with a smile. Mr. Lewis laughed, shaking his head as he wiped his eyes. "I don't think I have a choice." He turned to the crowd. "Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you." As the sun rose higher in the sky, the moment solidified in everyone's hearts. This wasn't just about a car. It was about recognizing the impact of a single person's kindness. And for the first time, Mr. Lewis wasn't the man in the background. He was the center of a moment he would never forget. Have you ever witnessed an act of appreciation this big? Tell us your story in the comments. As the cheers slowly faded and the students began dispersing, Mr. Lewis remained standing beside his new car, his fingers still resting lightly on the hood as if afraid the moment might disappear. The morning sunlight glinted off the polished surface, making the deep metallic blue shine like something out of a dream. Barron watched the man's reaction carefully. In his heart, he had hoped for this exact response. Pure, unfiltered emotion. Mr. Lewis had always been someone who put others before himself, never expecting anything in return. But today, for the first time, the tables had turned. Today, the school had given back to him. The janitor finally turned to face Barron, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know how to thank you, son. I never imagined something like this." Barron smiled. "You don't have to thank me. This wasn't just me. It was all of us. Every student, every teacher, every person you've helped in ways you never even noticed. This is just our way of showing how much you mean to this school." Mr. Lewis swallowed hard, nodding as he took in the sea of smiling faces around him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, faded photograph. One Barron recognized immediately. It was of a younger Mr. Lewis, standing beside a much older model of his now replaced car. Beside him, two young kids beamed at the camera, their arms wrapped around their father's shoulders. "My kids," Mr. Lewis murmured, holding up the photo. "I bought my first car when they were little. It was nothing fancy, but it got us through some tough times. I've driven that car for so long because it reminded me of them, of how far we've come." He looked at Barron. "And now, I have something new, a fresh start. And I owe it all to you." The crowd, sensing the significance of the moment, remained silent. It was a rare pause in the usual noise of a high school gathering. A moment of shared understanding, of quiet gratitude. Principal Williams finally stepped forward, placing a hand on Mr. Lewis's shoulder. "You deserve this, Ronald. And so much more." Mr. Lewis exhaled, running a hand over his face. "Well then, I guess I better take this baby for a spin." He chuckled, shaking the keys in his hand. "Anyone want to be my first passenger?" Laughter rippled through the students as Jason raised his hand. "As long as you promise not to make me mop the floors in return." With one final round of applause, the moment transitioned from surreal to reality. The students slowly dispersed, heading back inside with renewed energy, buzzing about what had just happened. But for those who had been there, who had witnessed the way kindness had come full circle, the memory would last far beyond that morning. Barron watched as Mr. Lewis slid into the driver's seat, adjusting his mirrors and placing his old photo carefully into the glove compartment. The engine purred to life, smooth and effortless, a stark contrast to the old vehicle's tired wheezing. Mr. Lewis grinned as he revved the engine lightly. "Guess I won't be holding up the parking lot anymore." Barron laughed. "I think you've earned the right to have the best spot from now on." As Mr. Lewis drove off, taking the small loop around the parking lot with a look of sheer joy on his face, Barron felt something settle inside him. An understanding that actions, no matter how small they seem at first, have the power to ripple outward, touching lives in ways we might never fully grasp. And sometimes, the people who do the most for others without seeking recognition are the ones most deserving of it. If this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe to Iconic Stories for more heartwarming moments, powerful connections, and unforgettable acts of kindness.